Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be speaking about a celestial conversation happening in the sky right now. And this is one of those very tricky energies that might be really influential in the present moment, as in right now. Of course, fortunately, this is a short term aspect, so its influences won't be felt for a prolonged time, which kind of means even if you personally might receive the most lower possible expression of this energy, well, it is a couple of days and you'll be absolutely fine. Yet the reason why I decided to speak about this energy is because the spiritual lesson behind it is something which we can apply each and every day in our lives. And also because one of the power players in this celestial conversation is Mercury. Well, this is a kind of energy that we're going to be experiencing once every year. And of course, in the next 5 years, more or less in the same format as we are experiencing right now. So this celestial conversation is Mercury in its home sign of Virgo, in exaltation, very strong, very comfortable, and also very hyperactive, standing across the sky from Neptune, also in its home sign. Now, the main reason why this energy can be so very tricky, it can be so very confusing, it can almost feel like we are being drowned in an emotion of stillness where nothing really flows in our lives. Nothing important to us personally ever happens. Even when we have, for example, like days which are really outside of our usual routines, perhaps the feeling and the spiritual essence of those experiences is not very profound, and this can leave us feeling that there is a lot missing from our lives, from our souls, from our psyche. And naturally, we want to understand why. We want to dig deeper. And while digging deeper is absolutely supported both by Neptune, Neptune right now is in the third decan of Pisces. It is exactly at 22 degrees and 19 minutes of this sign. And the third decan of Pisces is named the undoing of the self. So it is one of the most psychologically oriented energies in the sky, because the third decan of Pisces is very scorpionic. So it is basically the secret of our own soul design, of our own unconscious mind, and this can go back as far as early childhood and in very many cases even beyond, so previous existences. While Mercury in the sign of Virgo kind of represents the spirit, of course, already manifested. And when we want to dig deeper, well, we have to use our rationality, our logic, our understanding, our knowledge, and all of our masteries based on life experiences, which are basically repetitions of something. Now, this is Mercury in the sign of Virgo. And when two planets stand across the sky from each other, they oppose each other. Well, that is a hard aspect. The energy is not very easy because the symbolism of both planets has to balance each other out. So oppositions always have like a karmic nuance to them. And they also have a very personal nuance as well, because this opposition is one way or another under our control. Because if we give meaning to that opposition, so for example, if two areas of our lives or two inner symbols, two different, maybe even opposing inner energies face each other, well, if we are the supreme judge of our own beings, we have a word to say in how that opposition, that balance has to look like for us personally, individually. So self-knowledge already takes away a lot of this burden which an opposition can feel like. Of course, if we allow ourselves to be carried by the energies, by the tide, so to speak, an opposition will still find a balance, it will still play out, but chances are it will be kind of hard, because if we don't navigate that, we're just a leaf on the water being carried by the waves as the waves will. And also, if we don't stand from a place of like deep self-knowledge, knowing of our own psyches, not just the superficial identity which we may possess, but also our inner cores, also our unconscious tendencies, for example. All of these can be a great help at any given opposition, regardless which planets, which sign from which area of life. A profound self-knowledge is always extremely helpful because it basically takes the burden off our shoulders, symbolically speaking. Because the very first thing any kind of opposition will tend to do is to show us, either karmically, psychologically, through communication, emotionally, intuitively, any way possible which can manifest in our lives, the big lesson behind it, why two areas of life or two energies, two inner symbols, inner expressions of anything have to be in balance with each other. And that balance, well, of course, it will mean different things for different people, because it will definitely not be 50-50. It has to be what works for us, what is healthy for us. And also, one kind of balance can be different in different stages of our lives, different moods, different external conditions, different inner conditions. It is not going to be the same when we are single or when we are in a relationship, when we are physically healthy, empowered, in a really good state, or when we're physically vulnerable, for example. So it's always very different. But self-knowledge and self-understanding is always a massive help. And of course, with every opposition, there is always going to be a dominant planet, and there is always going to be a weaker planet. And if the dominant planet is something which doesn't necessarily serve our greatest good in a given context, then we can actively empower the weaker planet and make this opposition work for us in a very easy way, because energy goes where our focus goes, and that is perfectly valid from a psychological perspective as well. For example, those people who have a lot of oppositions in their birth charts, well, they were trained all throughout life how to have a greater sense of self-discipline, how to control themselves, what to allow to be expressed and what to be kept within. And naturally, people who have a lot of oppositions in their personal charts will ultimately, one way or another, when they reach maturity, they will embody at least one aspect of wisdom, because those oppositions will be a lot of life lessons. They will be a lot of different situations in life when someone or something, either a person, for example, if it's like in the 7th house or the 3rd house, etc., will challenge them directly. So as they overcome challenges by self-mastery, self-discipline, knowing when to detach, knowing when to get involved, knowing when good intent leads to something truly positive and constructive, and also knowing when good intent just paves the road to hell, symbolically speaking, of course. All of these are really powerful life lessons. And it is, a life lesson which you just cannot forget ever. It becomes imprinted into your mind. And ultimately the end result is that people with a lot of oppositions will be extremely diligent, moral, reliable people. They will also be quite flexible. But flexible doesn't mean to make certain easy compromises. So their ideals, their morality usually has to remain solid, intact. They can operate at their best standing from a place of great integrity. But within that integrity, they can be very, very flexible, adaptable, quite tough. And also these people are very hard to manipulate, very hard to convince, very hard to deceive, because they had so very many experiences in life. Experiences which were at one point very tough, very hard, very, very challenging to overcome, but as they progress through life, these challenges will become that much more easier because the person is much stronger, wiser, experienced, and with greater moral integrity. And this moral integrity, regardless of how spiritual the person is or not, that person can be a total atheist, and still, if they live a moral and dignified life, well, that kind of equates to a modus vivendi, if this makes sense, where the human spirit, the spirit of humanitarianism, so to speak, morality, still dominates their life philosophies, their perspective and perceptions. They chose to live this way. So that means that the divine forces, karma, and everything within spirituality is still going to work in their lives, even if they're not aware of that. Their unconscious is still going to be a valid gateway for the divine, where it is their actions and choices that matter the most, for those will be always aligned with morality. And that means that the divine frequency is perfectly at home there, regardless if they're aware or not. Now, this was a pretty long and maybe boring for some people introduction to today's aspect, but I kind of feel that this was necessary to understand what both of these planets are doing. And also, both of these planets are in their home signs, so they're very strong. Yet still it is Neptune who is the predominant power. And Neptune, even though it is the symbol of the divine source, it is the Holy Spirit, if I'm allowed to use more biblical terms, Christ consciousness, infinite compassion and love. That inner impulse and the spirit of creation, which actually sets us apart from animals. Even though in this day and age it is questionable, because even dogs have more emotional wisdom and a certain kind of maturity than some people out there who are consumed by this hyper ego that is basically the biggest problem in this day and age. But maybe I'll speak about this in another recording. So this is the higher expression of Neptune, but it also has a lower expression, because the divine source and the creative inner spark from within us is basically absolute. And in order for us human beings to truly embody it and be connected to it in a really pure manner, where the connection is like direct, we would have to abandon basically our human lifestyle, which would be impossible. So the way we kind of work with this is through symbolism and interpretation. And one of the expressions of this is art, of course, where we kind of transmute and modify that we see and perceive with our physical eyes, or that which we feel deep within us, and try to give it a more, let's say, divine, creative, beautiful, or sometimes even absurd expression. But the same energy can be used for lies, manipulation, emotional and psychological blackmail, where someone kind of pulls the strings like a puppet master, and we might not even be aware of that. And also when we have a very, very strong Neptune, and we might be experiencing the not so favorable expression that can be fear, worry, a confusion where we just cannot make sense of a situation or someone else's feelings or whatever. Logic doesn't work, not even emotional intelligence works, psychology doesn't work. Basically, no human tool works when Neptune kind of drowns the expression of the other planet, and when the other planet is actually Mercury, planet of mind, rationality, etc. Well, you can imagine that this will lead to a big state of confusion, where this can become so severe that we might be afraid of receiving information. We might be genuinely, terrified or feeling anxious to even turn on the TV, open social media, any kind of net channel or network where we receive information from. This is where the phone ringing or receiving texts and messages might just trigger you like, oh no, not today, please, not today. Sometimes even thinking about our problems, trying to come up with solutions, analyzing stuff, again Mercury and Virgo, can lead to extreme mental fatigue, because either we overdo it to an extent where we just reach absurdity, or we just cannot make sense regardless of what we do, because this Neptune drowns Mercury. And Mercury is also a water energy, for that matter. So basically it's when the infinite ocean swallows up another body of water, for example, so it dissolves everything. Now chances are that Mercury is the initiator here. Mercury is the fire starter, because in the sign of Virgo it asks questions. It wants to know why. So basically the darker expression of Virgo is criticism, a hair-splitting kind of attitude. And Virgo is very specific that it is very comfortable of turning all of this against the self. First of all, it kind of turns it against the self, and only then against the environment, so to speak. So this is where I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not skilled enough, I'm not intelligent enough. Why can't I possibly do this? Why can I possibly do that? And this is where we might compare ourselves to other people. Look at X, Y, my neighbor, my, let's say, distant relative. They did this and this and this. Why can't I possibly be like them or act like them, do like them, at least once in my life? Or another expression, Neptune is always divine inspiration. It is like a muse. So you might get inspired, you might get even a really good idea, because at the same time we have a very active Uranus trining Mars. So that is epiphany, ingenious moments. And if we add Neptune into the picture, maybe that is also divinely inspired. And then Mercury in Virgo has to execute it. But because it's drawn by Neptune, fear, uncertainty, the murkiness of the unconscious, well, I don't have this, that. And it gives you all the reasons why you can't. And this is where it's really up to you. And again, the opposition, you have to take control of this energy and inspire Mercury through your own willpower. And this is actually quite possible in the present moment, because Mars is also in that part of the sky where you tell Mercury, okay, I totally understand why I can't, but now let's search for reasons why I actually can. And because it stands across the sky from Neptune, Neptune is the absolute, the ideal. Virgo is also perfectionism. Well, if Mercury cannot find any logic, any rationality in the material world and down-to-earth matters, Virgo is an earth sign. You can always try to find a lot of, let's say, karmic reasons. So if you have a lot of doubts, insecurities, a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do this, why you can't achieve that, why you're not good enough, why the problems simply don't disappear from your life, why other people don't get you. You know, everything that you can basically criticize about yourself, about your life, about your choices. Just sit down for a moment and evoke this Neptune. So basically ask yourself, how would you see your life, your own unique situation, if you were a higher force? And a higher force is infinitely intelligent and even omnipotent compared to us. So ask yourself, what would be the karmic reasons why that infinite force can simply, through your own uniqueness, through the power of your own unconscious, where the infinite lies within us, why would that support you or help you to get what you need or to solve the problems, all the reasons why you're not good enough? Why would it help you to overcome those, even out-cheat those? From a karmic perspective, how would your success, how would your accomplishment serve the greater good of the divine from a karmic perspective? Because ultimately both Pisces and the sign of Virgo is service to others / self-sacrifice. So that which is in your life, especially all the virtues, everything that you're good at, everything that makes you powerful, how does that serve the greater good? And you don't have to take this very rationally. Not in the way that I do this and that and that. For example, I go and help a charity every Wednesday or anything like that. But try to look at it from a very subtle perspective where it is more your unconscious and what you do passively or what you feel, what you live passively, that represents the energy that flows from you into the collective. Like one of the most simplest examples is a farmer. Through their agriculture, well, they serve nature, they serve everything that basically any living being is part of. So that is so very simple. Through their lifestyle choices, sacrifices, they kind of serve nature through their own distinctiveness as in a human being. Or an artist, a singer, basically they hold a certain kind of frequency which inspires and feeds other people's souls, imagination, etc. But these are very palpable examples because it is also their life path, their career choice. But let's take a more difficult example, a homeless person. Well, a homeless person may be the embodiment of the divine, where those people who are very fortunate have a chance to show how merciful they are, to show how generous they are, to give back that honor that the divine blessed them with, and help that person. That is so very, very Neptunian, because the principle, what you do to another, you do to the divine, you do to your source, you do to yourself ultimately. Or when you help a starving artist, for example, someone who does something very Neptunian, but they struggle. And that struggle of theirs is the most sacred part of their lives, actually. But of course, in a very unconscious way, because no one would choose poverty, hunger, and stuff like that for themselves, and to be humiliated each and every single day despite of their great talent and the spirit that they possess. Yet from an unconscious perspective, if you look at this situation from the divine eyes, well, that starving artist who is probably in this situation because they don't wanna make those compromises which would take away their purity, so they just rather stay in love forever with their art, with the purity of their Neptunian expression, and suffer the consequences. yet still from a divine perspective, because they chose that, they represent vessels of how other people, those who are rich, powerful, maybe those who have made certain compromises in their lives to get money, to get fame, to get fortune, to get material resources, that just stain their karma by giving to these people. They simply purify their own karma because they will give the excess of money, of resources, food, painting materials, whatever that Neptunian person might need to have a more comfortable life. By giving to them, you give that excess that would otherwise corrupt you. So basically you're doing yourself a service, and it is that person who would receive this who is doing an act of self-sacrifice. So how twisted, how opposite an opposition this situation is, where the beneficiary and the giver have actually reversed roles. And of course, this situation within an opposition can be totally different because there is unhealthy expression of this energy. For example, when a beggar intentionally makes their situation so dramatic to deceive people to give them, well, if someone doesn't have the wisdom and the instinct, the intuition to know the difference between a genuine divine vessel and someone who mimics it, well, they will not absorb any karma, they will just fall into the trap of the beggar. So what's the point of these examples? Well, it is exactly to give that very anxious and very determined Mercury, who digs for answers, who hair splits, who criticizes, an answer that he has to accept and work with. So for example, take a look at your situation, something that is severe, something that is making you unhappy, something that this Mercury would truly criticize, and ask yourself why you have it in your life. But in a way where you are not seeking to fault yourself or other people, who deceived who, or maybe you made wrong choices, you were naive, etc. But look at your situation from the eyes of the divine. How does your unfavorable situation, your suffering, your pain, your lacks, the needs that you don't have met in your life, how does it serve the greater good? By suffering this, by going through this, by accepting, again unconsciously, to have this in your life and to live it, who are you giving a chance to create, let's say, some good karma for themselves, or to purify their spirits, to get in touch in a much more deeper and personal way, let's say with the divine spirit, by helping you, or by putting in a good word, or simply taking a look at your example of your situation and realizing how fortunate they are not to have the same. Now, this energy definitely also has a spiritual expression, and from a spiritual perspective, the question why Mercury might ask, why isn't this or that manifesting in my life? Aren't I good enough? Aren't I worthy enough? Aren't I devoted enough? Aren't I spiritual enough? Knowledgeable enough? What am I doing wrong? And I do believe that in this case, Neptune gives the answer. How truly pure are you in your beliefs? And by no means does this mean fanaticism of any kind, because purity means that you believe something with an aura, with a sensation of pure innocence. When you believe something, because it kind of sources up deep from within your unconscious, it is something you cannot explain, it is just something that you feel very, very strongly. And no matter what kind of rationality or even higher knowledge, philosophies you apply to change that belief, you still can't. So basically that is pure belief. And in this day and age, a lot of us lost this purity, we lost this childlike innocence. This might be the reason why we cannot manifest certain things. And also, there is this manifestation trend just sweeping over the spiritual culture of this present day, which is like an abomination, to be honest, in the eyes of a true spiritualist. Because on one hand, of course it works because you're fueling your greed. You're hyper activating your ego. So of course the money that you need, the fake love, attention, whatever that you might want to manifest enters your life. What you don't know is that you're consuming your soul. So for those people who this manifestation, this modern trend with self-hypnosis and stuff like that doesn't work, you know what? You're actually lucky. You're favored, protected, and loved by the divine, that it won't let you stain yourself like that. Of course, it blocks you from hurting yourself without even knowing. And for those who it works like a charm each and every time, well, what can I say? Natural selection. Of the spiritual kind, because you will consume everything that you are in a lifetime. A lifetime is just a blink of an eye. How will you feed your soul back to what it was when you got here? Like, controlling your reality is one thing. That is self-discipline. That is like true knowledge. But obsessively being in control of your reality and trying to be a god, now that is something totally else, which will consume you almost 100%. Manifestation should not be easy for a very, very good reason. But this is the age of Aquarius after all. It is one of freedom. Those restrictions, even the ethereal restrictions which kind of made manifestation very hard, perhaps 3 years ago and before, of course, those are no longer in place, so the divine won't protect us. It won't protect anyone. If you really are obsessed of getting this and that, whatever you might want, it will let you have it, as simple as those techniques teach you, but you will pay the price in energy, and that is soul energy, that is energy from the core of your being, without you even knowing it until maybe it's too late. And when it's too late, you will just feel that nothing makes you happy anymore, regardless of what you do. And when you try to connect to spirituality, but the deeper kind, where you it takes in your mind that what you have done is only superficial. The universe isn't actually like just a logical, rational energy, like a supercomputer, because it is all soul really. But the soul won't reveal itself until you have the eyes to see it. And when this sticks in your mind that maybe this is the bigger truth, you will struggle to connect. You will struggle to feel. The universe will not connect with you on a soul level until you purify yourself, until you feed your soul back to what it originally was. So that will put you back to square one, because the only thing that can feed you is love, and that can be love from another person, but real love. And by this I don't mean necessarily romantic love, any kind of, or self-love. And that doesn't come easy. That is where you will have to do the true spiritual work, like it or not. So this is also a very fine expression of this Mercury and Neptune opposition, because Mercury can represent all the quantum knowledge, all the psychological, parapsychological tricks, all the law of attraction and resonance and frequencies, but only when that knowledge basically meets the pure spirit Neptune in the sign of Pisces, is when true manifestation and magic and mystery, and call it whatever you want, is gonna actually work. You know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So basically the bigger picture is, if this Mercury-Neptune opposition makes you ask yourself, why didn't I manifest this? Why didn't divine help come and save me? In my terms and conditions, of course. Well, just look at yourself through the divine's eyes and see why that bad situation that you're in actually serves something or someone, a principle, a force. And even though it is painful for you, well, ultimately, on one hand, it teaches you, and this is how you build solid spiritual trust. And this is where you're not learning actually to trust something outside of you, but the fact that you're unconscious, if you manage to keep it pure enough, well, that is basically the divine within you, and you can trust it with absolutely anything. That is where infinite power lies in each and every one of us without any exception. But it has to unfold in its own way. You cannot control it. Exactly, because there is more to your situation than meets the eye, even the eye of an outsider, another person, for example. That's why you need to look at yourself through the eyes of the divine, because everything bad that we have in our lives, everything that makes us vulnerable, something that we just can't succeed at, that serves something higher. We are channels to allow other people, because regardless of who it is that we are, any human being lives in a society, so we are interconnected. We are like an invisible network. So every need that you have, well, another person somewhere, somehow, somewhen, has what it takes to fill that need, to help you. So basically the divine will keep this situation, let's say, active and ongoing, to give those souls the chance to represent the divine force themselves. As I said, when you help someone or something, in that moment, through that gesture, you are the divine. You are basically the hand of God working in the life of that person. But the universe cannot force anyone, or it respects free will. It can just signal that, look, X, Y, a person here or there, or a case that you heard about or saw somewhere, might need your help. You might have something within you, or materially, or in any possible way, to be the divine help in that case, to embody the spirit of the divine and do something, even if it's like a share or a like, or this is so very complex of how we can be of help. And we have to make the decision, do I allow myself to be a channel for the divine in that moment, just as that other person, the one in need, consciously or unconsciously accepted the situation to be the vessel which will be the receiving end of the divine power, elevating from a spiritual and even psychological perspective both them and the giver, or vice versa. But of course, if no one wants to take this role on, after a while the divine will definitely solve the situation. Now, if this is just a desire or a need or a fantasy that you want to make reality, the same principle is absolutely applicable, just that you can terminate it anytime you want, because it's not imperative for your existence or your karma or whatever. But when that situation, that need, the problem that you have in your life, and you just cannot solve it, no matter what it is that you do, that is when you can consider yourself a vessel. And chances are someone in your life from your distant past, or simply another human being out there, should be the key to the solution. Just that the divine cannot manipulate karmic forces to override two wills. that of your own and that of the other person or group or whatever that other may mean. And the alignment will definitely take place when, on a soul level, even unconsciously perhaps, you enter into that state that I am ready to receive it, and that other person I want to give, I want to share, even if you two might not even know each other yet. But of course, this will only persist for a limited amount of time. Now, how we feel about this, if it's too long or whatever, this is of course subjective. After which, if it's urgent and if it's necessary for your own karmic path, etc., the divine will compensate. It will do it on its own, through its own means. Miracle, if it has to be. That's why sometimes for certain people, this urgent situation will have instant help, while for other people it will take sometimes years. But there is always compensation here, because if it takes years, whatever you experience that, you will become immune to it. You will have a great soul level mastery. When going through something infinitely painful, something that you cannot solve yourself, and the need, the lack, or whatever, the crisis is there with you for a good number of years, let's say, that gives you an immense power, even if as a human being you will not perceive it that way. And if other people don't help you from a spiritual perspective, literally this Neptune opposing Mercury, it's really, really, really their loss and not yours. For you it's a gain, because if the divine mind has to take things in its own hands, and it has to because it's fair, it's correctness. However it will solve the situation, well, it will be more than satisfactory. And usually it is gonna be a very, very long-term solution, in many cases for the rest of this existence. But of course, this way of thinking, this way of philosophizing about life is not easy, because it's easy to say and suggest, but it's much harder to sit down and try to meditate or contemplate when there is a aggressed Mercury by Neptune. As I said, Neptune drowns it. But this might prepare all of us for an upcoming aspect where Mars will take Mercury's place soon enough, and that might be a time for action. Spiritual action, of course. And also the most negative expression of that energy is when you feel like truly wishy-washy. You no longer have ambition for anything. You don't want to do any. You just want to stay in peace. You just want to preserve a state of calm. Mars doesn't really like to be drowned by Neptune. But if you do this meditation, this contemplation, this soul searching now with Mercury opposing Neptune, the wisdom that will be given to you by your own soul, by your own unconscious mind, will serve you so very well to turn that Neptune opposing Mars soon enough into something delightful, favorable, peace, serenity, undying faith and devotion, where it doesn't matter how you feel, because you will have no doubt in your mind that the spirit is living through you and everything's perfect. So this concludes today's analysis. Thank you so much for being here and listening. Wish everyone a blessed week. Until next time, bye for now.